are opened to the next clean page in our math notebook, and we are ready for today's notes. So today, we are titling our page 4.4 Multiplied Decimals by Whole Numbers. 4.4 Multiplied Decimals by Whole Numbers, and then today's date, which is 11-10-20. Multiplied decimals by whole numbers. And I used a hashtag symbol for numbers since I didn't have a whole lot of room at the top of my paper. So you guys, in our last lesson, we practiced estimating. So taking decimals, rounding them, and getting an answer that's a whole number. Today we're going to practice having one decimal number and one whole number and multiplying those together. And I will tell you that you might be thinking, oh man, Missy, multiplying decimals, that seems like it's going to be really hard. I'm going to tell you it is easier than you think it is. It's like multiplying whole numbers, except there's an extra step at the end that we have to do for the decimal point, okay? All right. Are we ready to move on? Does everyone have the title at the top and the date? Yes. All right. All right, so we're going to start with an example. So our example is multiply 1 15/100 by 3. So 1.15 by 3. And now I do want to point out that this dot after the 3, that is a period because it's a sentence. Okay, it's not a decimal point, it is a period. Just wanted to point that out. So our example, multiply 1 15/100 by 3. Put a thumbs up on your desk when you have this written down, 5th grade. So Frankie, go ahead and get the title, date, and example written down. So, basically, So, what you want to do is draw out, you know how to make a 3D box. I want you to draw a 3D box. It's more like a visual. Ready to rock? All right, 5th grade, are we ready to move on? All right, so Frankie, while you were gone using the bathroom, I was explaining that when we multiply, why are we talking? When we are multiplying decimals, it's just like multiplying whole numbers, except we have an extra step at the end for placing the decimal point, okay? So our example that we're using today is multiplying 1 15/100 by 3. So our first step, step 1, stack and multiply like they're both whole numbers. Ignore the decimal. So when you are multiplying decimals, 5th grade, the first step is to stack them like you would whole numbers, just like normal whole numbers. and multiply them without worrying about the decimal. So your first step, you're multiplying. You're not even worried about the decimal. All right, so Jackie, go ahead, get the title, date, and our example written down. So thumbs up when you have the directions for step 1 written down. And don't start multiplying it yet. I'll show you after you get the actual step written down. Thumbs up on your desk, please, when you have this written down so far. Awesome. Thank you, Layla. Thank you, Richie. Thank you, Emmy. Thank you, Senna. Thank you, Will. Thank you, Elena, and Allison, and Michael, and Philip, Addie, Mackenzie, Grayson. And Frankie, thank you. Eosius, thank you. Zoe, thank you. Jack L, thank you. See a few more people finishing up, so we're going to give them another moment or so. Chanel, thank you. Awesome. Now, while a few people are finishing up their notes so far, when we have two numbers we're multiplying 5th grade, which one do we usually like to stack on the top? Which one do we usually like to stack on the top? Which one? Addie? The larger one, right? Because then it's almost like we have to do less work, right? So if we're looking at the two numbers we're multiplying, the 1 and 1500ths by 3, which one would you want to put on top? Raise your hand. Which one would you want to put on top? Which one would you put on top, Mackenzie? 3. Okay. Now, technically 3 is larger than 1 and 1500ths, right? But if we're stacking them and we have to multiply, are we technically going off of the value of the number or the number of digits in the number? So if we want the number with the most digits on top, which one would you want to put on top then? 1 in 1500ths, right? Yes, I purposely asked that question, and I was hoping you'd say 3, Mackenzie, so I could explain that. So thank you. Okay, so our step 1 is to stack and multiply like they're both whole numbers, and we're supposed to ignore the decimal to start. So if we do that, we're writing it just like we normally would if they were whole numbers. So 1 in 1500ths times 3. So notice I did put 1 in 1500ths on top because it has the most digits. And when we stack it this way, then we're just taking the 3 and multiplying by the 5, then the 1, then the 1, instead of having it the other way and then having to, add placeholder zeros and whatnot. So 5th grade, I would like you to follow step number 1. I want you to ignore the decimal point in 1 in 1500ths. So you can look at this as if it's 115. Just go ahead and multiply. Follow step number 1 and multiply. Put a thumbs up on your desk when you have the answer while ignoring that decimal. Awesome. Thank you, Addie, Zoe, Elena, Frankie, Michael, and Layla, and Richie. and Mackenzie, and Senna, and Emmy. That's our first step. Yep. So guys, when it comes to multiplying decimals, you kind of treat them like whole numbers until you get to the end. That's when we figure out where to put the decimal in our product, in our answer. In fifth grade, what I usually like to do, ready to rock? When I get my answer, I do usually like to leave just a little bit of space in between each of the digits in the answer I found because we're not quite sure where that decimal is going to go yet. So if you have them all really squished together right now, why don't you go ahead and rewrite what you got and make sure there's at least enough space between each number for a little decimal point. So there's space there when it's time for us to write it. All right, ready to rock? Are we ready to look at this together?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to do what you just did. I'm going to pretend the decimal point is not there, and I'm going to multiply. 3 times 5 is what?
15.
15, so I'm going to carry my 1, bring down my 5. 3 times 1 is?
3.
Plus the 1 is?
4.
4. And notice, I have enough space right here for a decimal if that's where it's going to go. And 3 times 1 is?
3.
3. How many of you got 3, 4, 5 as your answer? 3, 4, 5. Awesome. Phil, put your book away. So, 5th grade, now that we've done step 1, we've multiplied like they're both whole numbers and we ignored the decimal. Then we have to do step 2. So step 2 is, I'm going to scoot this up a little bit. We are going to count how many digits are behind the decimal. And do you guys notice how I put the S in parentheses? Do you notice? Do you know what that means when someone writes something like this? It means it applies whether you have one decimal or more than one decimal. So count how many digits are behind the decimal or decimals to figure out where to put the decimal in your answer. So put a thumbs up. Put a thumbs up when you have step 2 written out. So once we multiply like they're whole numbers and ignore the decimal, then we're going to go back up to the numbers we multiplied. You're just writing it down. Jackie, you should be writing right now. Once we get those numbers, we've ignored the decimal. Then we go back up to the numbers we just multiplied and we look, okay, so in those two numbers we multiplied, how many digits are behind decimal points? And that is going to let us know where to put the decimal point in our answer. Thumbs up on your desk when you have step 2 written down. And then I'm going to explain to you what I mean. This is cross out. This is cross out. Yes. Count how many digits are behind. And notice I underlined the word behind, so you should have underlined the word behind. Count how many digits are behind the decimals to figure out where to put the decimal in your answer. Thank you, Layla. Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Richie. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Yossi. Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Joey. It says count how many digits are behind the decimals to figure out where to put the decimal in your answer. And this is the last step, so there won't be any more steps to write after this one. Yep, just practice after. So I'll have like the example of step 2, kind of like up here we have the example for step 1. Then I'll have the example for step 2, and then we'll have practice problems. Yep. All right. So it looks like a few people are just finishing up the last part of step 2. Nice job. A few people finishing up. Where to put the decimal in your answer. Awesome, you guys. So, to follow step 2 then, I rewrote the problem from step 1. And before you write, I want you to look at the smartboard first. Before you write, look at the smartboard so I can explain to you what I'm talking about. Now, I rewrote my problem. So if I'm looking at it, I need to count how many digits are behind the decimals. So if I look at the top 2 numbers, 1 and 1500ths, I'll scoot it up a little bit. 1 and 1500ths and 3. I have 2 digits behind decimals total up here because is 3 a decimal number, 5th grade? No, so there are no digits behind the decimal. But in 1 and 1500ths, I have the 1 and the 5 that are to the right or behind the decimal. So since there are 2 digits behind the decimal, we need 2 digits behind the decimal in our answer. So I count 1, 2. So then I go in 1, 2 and place my decimal there. And I check, okay, are there 2 digits behind the decimal in my answer now with the decimal between the 3 and the 4? Yes, 3.45. Richie, what is your question? No, for this one that worked, but in future problems, that isn't always going to be the case. So, for example, Richie, if we had 1.5 times 1.5, how many digits are behind the decimal there? 2. So would I be able to just drop down the decimal in that problem? No. So that's why we are getting into the habit or the practice of counting them now when we have a whole number so that we aren't trying to just drop it down when we have multiple decimal numbers. Does that make sense? That's a great question. I'm happy you asked it. You're right. For this one, it lines up. It does drop right down, but that's not always going to be the case. We want to look at the 2 numbers we multiplied, ask, okay, how many digits are to the right of all decimals up top? There's only 2. So then I would make sure there are 2 digits behind the decimal in my answer. How many? What? So we want the same. So these are behind our decimal. These are in the tenths and the hundredths place. Yep. These are behind the decimal. All right. Is that a little easier than you guys thought it would be to multiply decimals? Yes. Okay. And I know that we're not multiplying two decimals right now, but we're practicing with a whole number so that we can get into the habit of, okay, multiply like their whole numbers, then go ahead and place your decimal. And that's what we'll do when we eventually have more than one decimal to multiply. You mean here? No, if you don't want to, you don't have to. You could put a comma. That's fine. Kind of like saying so. That's why I put the ellipse. So we need 2 digits behind the decimal in our answer. And then when you are ready, we are going to have a few practice problems. There are only 4. There are only 4 practice problems. That's okay. You're almost done. Nope, you're just taking your time, and that's okay. Nice work, 5th grade. You're doing a great job. So I will tell you guys, today we're multiplying, decimal and a whole number. Tomorrow we're going to practice just making sure when we're multiplying 2 decimals that the decimal is in the correct spot in the answer. So we'll get used to that. And then on Thursday, we will then actually multiply 2 decimals together. That way you kind of know where we're going. Okay, are we ready to write down some practice problems? Okay, you have one more moment. A few people are finishing up. Voices should be off, though. Voices should be off, though. You need at least 16, okay? Okay. So, our practice problems are right here. Ready to rock. Alright, so, number 1. 34 6/10 times 9. Number 2. 56 times 4/10. Number 3. 10 76 hundredths times 100. And number 4. 2 54 hundredths times 12. Now you'll notice that for most of them I stacked them for you, but number 2, I want you to practice stacking it yourself. And you're going to follow the steps we just did. You're first, once you've stacked them, like they're whole numbers, you're going to multiply them and not worry about that decimal point. Once you've done that, then you're going to look back up at the 2 numbers you multiplied and count how many digits are behind the decimal place, and that is how you will know where to put the decimal in your answer. You can go ahead and start solving these practice problems once you have them written down. I'll know you're finished when I see you quietly waiting with a thumbs up, or quietly reading, drawing, writing, working on your heart map, anything like that. Go ahead. fifth grade, we're going to look at these together. I know that some of you may still be working, so I want you to make sure you're following along with me and getting them written down as we go. So, number one, we have 34 and 6/10 times 9. Now, my first step is to ignore the decimal and multiply them like they're whole numbers, right? So, what is 9 times 6, fifth grade?
54.
It is 54, so I would carry the 5, bring down my 4. Then I have 9 times 4. What is 9 times 4? 36 plus 5 is 41. Carry the 4, bring down the 1. What is 9 times 3?
27.
Plus 4?
31.
31. So 3, 1. All right. How many of you got 3, 1, 1, 4 when you did this part? You got 3, 1, 1, 4. Awesome. Then we need to figure out where that decimal goes. So I'm going to look back up at the two numbers I multiplied and see, okay, how many digits are to the right of a decimal? Show me in your hands, you guys. How many digits are to the right of the decimal in the two numbers we multiplied? There's just 1, right? There's 6. So then I'm going to make sure I have 1 digit to the right of my decimal, and I'm going to put that decimal between the 1 and the 4. How many of you got 311 and 4/10 as your answer? Okay. How many of you put the decimal in the correct spot in your answer, but maybe did your math a little wrong? Okay. Are there questions on number 1? Okay. Then let's look at number 2. So, for number 2, I didn't stack it for you. You had to stack it yourself. So, we would stack it just like they were whole numbers, you guys. So, I would take 56 and 0.4. Stack them just like that. So, then I would take 4 times 6. What is 4 times 6, fifth grade? It is 24. So, carry the 2. Bring down the 4. What is 4 times 5? 20 plus 2 is 22. Now, what do I need to add here before I move on to the next number? A 0. Exactly. Thank you, Michael. So then I take 0 times 6, which is 0, and 0 times 5, which is 0. Then I have to add them together. So I end up with 2, 2, 4, right? Okay. Then I look back up at the top. How many digits do I have behind a decimal here? Show me on your hand. How many digits are behind a decimal for number 2? There's just the 1, right? In 4/10, I have the 4 to the right, so I'm going to make sure there is 1 digit to the right of my decimal. And my answer is 22 and 4/10. How many of you got 22 and 4/10 for number 2? All right. Let's look at number 3. Scoot it up a little bit. So number 3, you're going to multiply, ignore the decimal. 0 times 6 is 0. 0 times 7 is 0. 0 times 0 is 0. 0 times 1 is, wow, that was some hard math, fifth grade. Then, before I move on to that second 0, I need to add a placeholder 0. Yep. And then we do it again. 0 times 6 is?
0.
0 times 7?
0.
0 times 0?
0.
And 0 times 1?
0.
Wow. I know. Now, whoa, guys. Now we have a 1. So how many placeholder zeros do I need to add now? 2. I see Layla giving me a 2. Because remember, when we start, we want it to line up with that number we are multiplying. So, add 2 zeros. Okay, you guys, you ready for this?
Yes.
All right. What is 1 times 6?
6.
What is 1 times 7?
7.
What is 1 times 0?
0.
And what is 1 times 1?
1.
Whoa, you guys, give yourselves a pat on the back for that one. All right. All right, so then we have to add them all up. Okay, ready to rock? Does anyone remember what we call these numbers we're adding together?
Crazy zeros.
Say that again, Zoe. Partial products. Remember, they're part of the product. They're part of the answer. They're partial products. So when we add 3 zeros is 0. 3 zeros is 0. 2 zeros and a 6 is 6. 2 zeros and a 7 is 7.
That's like a heart
2
attack.
zeros is 0, and then we have our 1. Now, 5th grade, for number 3, if I look back up top at the two numbers I multiplied, how many digits are behind a decimal point here? Show me on your hand. How many? How many digits are to the right of a decimal point? There are 2. We have a 7 and we have a 6. So then that means when I go to my answer, I'm going to go in 2 spots. And I should have wound up with 1,076 and 0 hundredths. Or 1,076. Now, how many of you were either skipped some of the zeros or were tempted to skip some of the zeros? Did anyone feel that way?
Yes.
Now, if we had done that, this 6 might not be in the 1 spot. It might be over 1, right? Which, would that change the value of our answer?
Yes.
Yes, so that is why. Even though it's like, oh my gosh, Miss E, the zeros, why are we doing this? It's important. It's important you follow the steps and you do all of them because that way you're making sure each of the digits is in the correct spot. All right, I'm going to circle my answer and then we're going to look at our last one, number 4. All right, so then we have number 4. Same thing, ignore the decimal, multiply. 2 times 4 is what? 8. 2 times 5 is? 10. So I'm going to carry the 1, bring down the 0. 2 times 2 is?
4.
Plus 1 is? Then, before I move on to the 1, I'm going to add my placeholder 0. 1 times 4 is? 4. 1 times 5 is? And 1 times 2 is?
2.
Then I'm going to add my partial products. 8 plus 0 is 8. 0 plus 4 is? 4. 5 plus 5 is? 10. So carry the 1, bring down the 0. 2 plus 1 is? 3. Now, again, if we look back up at top at 4, my two numbers I multiplied, how many digits do I have to the right of the decimal? There are 2, right? We have the 5 and the 4. So I'm going to go in 2 spots at the decimal for 30 and 48 hundredths. Yes, hundredths. All right, I want you, once you have this corrected or written down, close your eyes for me or put your heads down. Close your eyes or put your head down. Close your eyes or put your head down. I want you to think about how you're feeling when it comes to multiplying a decimal by a whole number. I want you to think about the actual multiplying, but also the figuring out where to put the decimal in your answer. When I say go, you're going to show me 1 through 5 how you are feeling about this skill, multiplying a decimal by a whole number and putting the decimal in the correct spot. All right, go ahead and show me 1 through 5, how are we feeling about this? Still close your eyes, please. Hands down. I'm going to ask another question. Don't open your eyes yet. How many of you are feeling the most confident because you've been noticing silly mistakes when you're multiplying? How many of you have been noticing silly mistakes when you're multiplying? Okay, hands down. I'm going to ask another question. How many of you understand how to, or where to put the decimal in your answer? Raise your hand if you're feeling good about that part. Okay, hands down. And open your eyes. Thank you for letting me know. Thank you for letting me know. All right, ready to rock? So 5th grade, in your math workbook, you are going to open up to page 187. So 187. 187. Yes. 187. If you can hear me, touch the top of your head. If you can hear me, touch your elbow. All right, we should all be open up to page 187. You are going to circle number 2, number 6, number 13, number 15, 13, then 15, and then number 19, and I will repeat myself, we're on page 187, 188. You should have circled number 2, number 6, number 13, number 15, and number 19. So 5th grade, I'm going to give you about 5 minutes of work time. Don't rush to get this done if 5 minutes isn't enough. You know we usually have lots of additional work time throughout the day. I will turn on work music. What should be our volume level during this time? 0. Thank you.